So all you have to demonstrate is that he's a liar and he's not taking this seriously and he's going to hurt any other people that get in his way, like our judge. So when we started putting that together, we had that in mind. And then you have this reveal, right? Because that reveal takes you to a place where now you understand that there is more evidence out there that he is hiding from you and that he is lying about it directly on the stand. And then that evidence takes you to two places. One, that they didn't learn their lesson about Sandy Hook. And two, now you've got a bunch of financial data in there that he wasn't telling the truth about. His profit margins are higher than he was saying. His revenues are higher than he was saying. So that everything that was being told to the jury was a lie. I mean, I think, you know, a lot of people are asking me what was going on in his mind that during his multi-million-dollar defamation trial, he's actually broadcasting these kinds of statements about the judge. And I just tell people there's no off switch for Alex Jones. He cannot control himself. He is going to be who he is 24 hours a day.
I was going to ask about that because he was obviously instructed numerous times about how they were doing misconduct within the trial. Before we get to your Perry Mason moment, obviously, I did want to ask you, because you had already taken a sworn deposition by Alex Jones that he ends up contradicting later on, right? In addition to the fact that he is told by the judge directly, you're not able to speak about this case with anyone other than your lawyers. You certainly cannot go and broadcast about it or anything like that. Do you think that they were intentionally playing dumb because they don't feel they'd have to face consequences for their actions, or were they trying to turn the whole thing into such a circus that it could only be either thrown out like this is a kangaroo court or a mistrial, because I know they asked so many times for mistrial or something like that?
You know, I'd have to go with that second, just based on the things that Jones was saying, is that I think he felt that the process itself was illegitimate, and I think he honestly believed that. Like, I don't think he ever was able to wrap his own mind around the reasons that the things that were happening to him were happening to him. And so I do think he felt that it was a fundamentally illegitimate process. And so he just, I don't think he really fully considers the consequences of what he's doing when he does them. So again, because there's no off switch, this was what he was going to do. He was going, I mean, I knew that he was going to, during the trial, attempt to discredit the trial itself. What I did not understand that he was willing to do is put pictures of our judge on fire and call her pedophile trafficker. Like, how do you get that? And when that was happening during the trial, we were getting messages from folks saying that this was happening, you know, she should bring it up in the trial. We're like, no. People are like massively overstating what he's doing. That's not, there's not pictures of our judge on fire. And then boom, turn on InfoWars, there's pictures of our judge on fire. I mean, it was.
We have to issue a correction there. We have to issue a correction. Technically, according to Jones, they were the flames of Lady Liberty rising up behind her. So.
No, I didn't follow up on that. But I found it really interesting. If you look at that picture, which they had broadcast on there, the one place that there isn't fire is on Lady Liberty. Like, it's definitely off to the side on the two judges who are embroiled in flame. Yeah. And, you know, I asked him in trial, I'm like, I sure hope that there are InfoWars viewers who are able to split that hair just like you did and not come to the other impression, don't you? Right? Because it's interesting. I've been following. Part of the reason why I'm here is I was actually during the trial. Look, just to say, I've done some high profile work, but it's never at the end of a trial do I get bombarded with internet memes about the trial. Right? That's a whole new
yeah, I bet.
I noticed that the Twitch and online streaming communities were really into this trial and doing a lot of coverage onto it. And in one that really came to my attention is somebody sent me a clip of Hassan Piker and saying, you're on trial for stochastic terrorism. That's what you're on trial for right now against these parents by encouraging these people to come and hound around them. And at the moment you're on that trial, you are literally committing stochastic terrorism against each other. What is going on? That just blew my mind to see that happening. So.
Well, I can tell you from someone who spent the last like 3 or 4 years following Alex Jones intensely, it was so refreshing to watch this all go down, because we've been really gaslit over the last couple of years, especially by right-wing media. They're starting to do this meme, Alex Jones was right, Alex Jones is always right, Alex Jones is actually correct, right? And it's really been a horrifying thing to watch, because he is like anyone else. If you say and talk for 4 hours a day, you throw 1,000 dartboards at the wall, 10% of them might be true or factual statements, but it's the vast majority of them are outlandishly false, and some of them being very, very damaging to people's lives. He has to be called out for what he is. He's a paid liar who makes an empire of money off selling dick pills and brain force and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right, exactly. And I mean, it's not like, Look, it's not like his non-defamatory statements cancel out his defamatory ones anyway. But
Yeah.
I always find this defense real interesting of, oh, he got all these things right. And the ones you hear thrown around is like, oh, he was at Bohemian Grove. Yeah, a lot of people were uncovering Bohemian Grove at that time. He just tagged along on somebody. Like, that wasn't a big discovery on his part.
Yeah.
They mentioned he trumpets Epstein all the time. It's like, oh, I broke Epstein. He was years late on Epstein. I
Oh,
mean,
I
like,
know.
even, back in the early 2010s, there were people who understood what he was up to and after his convictions. And like, even in the late 2010s, you had people way far out on the left who were years ahead of it. Back in even like 2017, you had like Chapo Trap House was on that, True Anon was on that. Like
Mhm.
he comes onto that late and then says, I'm the guy who broke it. And it's like, okay, so you latch on to, like you say, 1,000 conspiracy theories. And if you're right about one of them, then like, because the other one he trumpets all the time is Jussie Smollett. I was right
Yeah.
about Jussie Smollett. And it's like, yeah, you were lucky once on that one because you're racist, and you just happen to be right. He's racist. Right? Like, that's not a. It's you land on these things, but the real focus of Jones has to be that he is an absolute misinformation machine and knows it. That's the thing that I think this trial was important to highlight. Is not that Jones said these things recklessly because he's a foolish man or something like that, but that the internal communications show that most of the things that he was saying that we were talking about in this trial, he knew weren't true. He knew he was saying them falsely. And that is how he operates. He has this enormous contempt for his audience. He does not like the people who end up buying these pills for him. He understands the scam he's working on. There's a big difference between lower level InfoWars employees who drink the Kool-Aid that he feeds them just as much as his audience, and somebody like Jones who doesn't believe the things he's saying. I mean, I people, that's a huge question I get asked all the time is, does Jones believe what he says on his show? And I have to tell them, for the most part, no. That there are certain things I'm sure he does, but for the most part, he completely understands what he's doing. That's why I find him so pernicious.
But isn't that one of the hardest things about a trial like this? Because so many people said to be able to demonstrate either slander or libel, you have to show that it was done intentionally and with malice, right? And that obviously is a huge burden for you to overcome, and you were successful in that. But at what point did you realize that you had that kind of a rock solid foundation for a case of this nature?
Almost immediately.
Oh, okay.
So the distinction is that I wouldn't actually face that high of a burden unless the plaintiffs were held to be public figures. And in this case, they weren't. Ultimately, they didn't do anything that was germane to the controversy that Jones was talking about. Just them being victims of Sandy Hook did not make them public figures. So we only had to prove negligence to get liability. But you're right that to get punitive damages, we'd have to prove malice. And I knew that immediately because when this case came to my door, I had to consume something like 150 hours worth of InfoWars right off the bat,
I'm
just
so
all
sorry.
their Sandy Hook coverage. It was wild. It really starts messing with your head after a while, particularly in that short of a time frame. But I had to prepare the lawsuit, and we had to do it in a rush too, because if Marcel hadn't sued when he did, and Neil called me when he did, they would have been outside the statute of limitations. If it'd been a couple more months, there would have never been a Sandy Hook lawsuit. And so we had to, in about a space of 2 weeks, understand and prepare all his statements for a lawsuit. And when I went through that, I understood there is not a jury of rational-minded people who would ever look at the entirety of what he said and not conclude that that was malicious. We knew it off the bat. So by the time you're in the lawsuit and you're getting emails from his chief editor, from Paul Watson, saying, look, our sources on Sandy Hook are batshit crazy. This story is killing us. We already knew we were going to find stuff like that. And we were lucky to find it. You'll notice that all of the key evidence of that sort of stuff came from Paul Watson, who was one person they couldn't hide evidence from, right? Because Paul's technically outside the country. He's over in England. He has his own email address. They knew if we subpoena Paul, he might turn this stuff over. He doesn't have that great of a relationship with Jones anymore. So there was really the stuff that they couldn't hide that ultimately made the case. And we always knew it was going to be there.
That's wild. I didn't know that Paul Joseph Watson turns out to be the linchpin in this entire thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I was surprised that him of all people would actually turn out in some ways to be a star player in all of this.
Before I get to you getting that wondrous email dump, 300 gigabytes of treasure trove of information, you said you were watching, obviously, people telling you that, Jones' show, he's going on there on a regular basis, blah, blah, blah. I think it's got to be unprecedented. You can correct me if I'm wrong, to see someone creating evidence in real time against their own case. Like when you saw that and your team saw that, were you both up at night recording it and then getting ready in the morning to submit it into evidence like the next
It's
day?
something like that. I'll actually shout out here to Dan Friesen at Knowledge Fight, who is the podcast that covers Alex Jones.
Yeah, friend of
And
the show.
somebody in the country knows more about Alex Jones than Dan Friesen. And he actually had become a consultant of mine during this case because he was a fountain of information. So him and his legion of his team, his fan base there, who was kind of closely following the trial, they were monitoring what Jones was saying during trial because obviously we're in the courtroom. And so they were able to, when we found out these things were being said and we told them, hey, can you isolate this and get us those clips? They actually cut that, sent that to us, and then we ended up using that as evidence on the fly.
Oh, that's
and
amazing.
You're right, I've never done that in a trial. I've never, it's very rare that you're putting evidence in that isn't on your exhibit list that was filed weeks earlier, right? But the idea that you're doing it with information occurring during the trial itself, I mean, it really is like TV stuff, right? And that's the only way that this could happen is it resembles like a Law and Order episode or a Matlock episode where something crazy happens during the trial itself. And that's because they abused the discovery period so thoroughly, right? Because normally everything comes out. And so there are no surprises. There are no moments like that. But when you combine his failure to comply with discovery along with this catastrophe of events that ended up with me having a lot of their data, it was just a made-for-TV moment. It was ready to go.
So what went through your and your team's heads when you got that email link, when it arrived on your doorstep?
Well,
like, what were the first things you thought?
The series of events is a little bit where when I first got the email link, I'm thinking, oh man, this guy is dumping some documents on us on the eve of trial, because it's like 3 days before trial this happens. And I'm like, what is going on here? So whatever. I'm doing trial preparation. I don't even have time to look at it. I forwarded it on over to my paralegal and say, hey, start downloading this stuff. And that download starts happening, and it's taking way too long. And my paralegal calls me and says, hey, we're downloading stuff, and these files keep on coming. But like the whole thing is like 300 gigs. Am I really supposed to be downloading all of this? Because if I keep downloading files, it will exceed hard drive space before I finish out downloading these files. What's going on? So I'm like, all right, let me take a look at this link. And I open it up and I look at it. And to clear up some confusion here, when we talk about over 300 gigs, this isn't just the material that's on the phone. This is the entire litigation file of one of the attorneys that they have now provided over to us. And so as I'm looking through it, at first I can't figure it out because it's very poorly organized, because it's a very obviously boomer attorney file system. Like it's hard to figure out what's going on. But I'm starting to figure out there are things in here that clearly I shouldn't, like, what is going on? They're like attorney work product. I start seeing that there are files that seem to indicate that they have private medical records, things like that. This is bad. So it's at that time that I contact opposing counsel and tell him, I don't think you were supposed to send this to me. And then that triggers a 10-day period where I'm not supposed to touch anything or look at anything. And he has 10 days to identify if there are any documents in there that are privileged and identify what they are, and I have to send them back and destroy any copies I have. That didn't happen. The attorney just said, hey, disregard the link, I'll send you a new link, and then never sent a new link or did anything. So 10 days pass is when I can finally actually look at this stuff.
What was the 9th day like? I gotta know. What was like?
That night, this is what you've got to keep in mind. Alex Jones is on the stand the following day, right? So that night's the first night. So I'm in trial, knowing that this notice hasn't come, but I can't look at anything yet because I'm actually in the courtroom. I'm kind of got my hands full. So it's not until I get out of the courthouse and scoot back to where we're staying that I can actually start looking at this stuff, and my team starts going through it. And that's when we discover there's a file in there, and it's titled Alex Jones full phone upload.zip. And we're like, what in the world? And so we open this sucker up, and yes, inside there's a folder that says SMS. It has 241 individual PDFs that all say messages with, and then it'll have either a phone number or the recipient's name. And we're realizing we're looking at what is raw, unfiltered text data. At that time, we looked at it, and the file creation date say May 21st, 2021. And so we're pretty excited because we know that that time is a really opportune time to rip Mr. Jones's phone. As we've now, like, we were able that night to just panically get through what we could, because it's like I said, we had downloaded quite a bit of that material, not all of it, so we didn't get the whole 300 gigs. But we're trying to figure out what's there. And so when we're going through this phone, we immediately find, yeah, there's text messages about Sandy Hook where Paul Watson's warning him that you're doing it all over again with COVID-19, that your COVID denial stories are fake and it makes us look ridiculous. So it's like they haven't learned a lesson at all. That there then we knew would be the cornerstone of the cross-examination. Now, later on, as we've gotten past trial, we've examined these texts, and unfortunately, from our perspective, they are limited from a period of 2019 to 2020. So we don't have into 2021 and on these texts, and that's unfortunate. But at the same time, there is a wealth of material in those messages that they definitely are going to suffer some consequences from turning over to us. So some of that is going to be coming out in upcoming proceedings coming up. So I can tell you the story of Mr. Jones's text messages are not over. That's for sure.
Is there anything you can say about the internet reporting and the Daily Beast about Tucker Carlson being deeply afraid of what is revealed in these text messages?
I probably shouldn't say anything about that.
All right, fair enough.
I don't want to go into any of the details. Look, the fact is we are fully vetting the information within to isolate what we would believe is newsworthy information that doesn't violate people's medical privacy, things like that.
Right.
That's a long process. It's 2.63 gigabytes on the phone, so that's a long process. But I can tell you, we do intend the things on that phone that are newsworthy will see the light of day. There are things on the phone though that are integral to the proceeding that we're involved in, right? So those things cannot be disclosed at this time. And then just in a general sense, I'll say that gosh, that if the shoe's on the other foot, I mean, look at the Hunter Biden laptop, look at all the different types of text messages that have leaked over the years by right-wing figures that where they have leaked their political enemies' figures. I mean, there's people in the world who are just begging me to release the phone publicly, and I'm not going to do that. I am going to have more respect for Mr. Jones in this process than he would for anybody else, even though I'm under no legal duty whatsoever. Right? None of these documents were declared confidential. None of them were declared privileged. But we're going to be treating them with a bit more respect than Mr. Jones would.
You just actually have standards, unlike him.
Right, right. Right, exactly.
So it sounds to me, from what you're telling me, there is such a short window that you had to be able to craft that moment. That beautiful moment between how did your team decide this is how we're going to ensnare him? This is how we'll pull him in. This is how we'll set it up. This is how we'll do the slam dunk. Like, how did you guys come up with all that?
I had a lawyer ask me about this the other day, and it's because he's like, look, you're coming up to Alex Jones' trial. You're litigating him for years. You've been waiting for this moment if he's going to testify. You're like, how did you craft that? And I said, look, every single thing that I ever intended to ask Jones before the trial started was thrown in the garbage. We literally, everything about that cross was crafted in the 24 hours preceding it. And it was based on the idea of Jones is going to be Jones. So the one thing you want to demonstrate is that he's not taking any of this seriously and that none of his testimony has any credibility. If you're trying to play on the field with him, if you want to argue with him about stuff, you're wasting your time. You are absolutely wasting your time. So all you have to demonstrate is that he's a liar and he's not taking this seriously and he's going to hurt any other people that get in his way, like our judge. So when we started putting that together, we had that in line. And then you have this reveal, right? Because that reveal takes you to a place where now you understand that there is more evidence out there that he is hiding from you and that he is lying about it directly on the stand. And then that evidence takes you to two places. One, that they didn't learn their lesson about Sandy Hook. And two, now you've got a bunch of financial data in there that he wasn't telling the truth about. His profit margins are higher than he was saying. His revenues are higher than he was saying. So that everything that was being told to the jury was a lie. What's interesting, though, about this is we got to talk to the jury for a good amount of time after the trial. And from the juror's perspective, Mr. Jones's cross-examination was basically meaningless in the context of the trial. It was an entertainment moment for them because they had already come to all of those conclusions on the previous days of the trial. When they had seen his producer testify, when they'd seen his protege, Owen Schroyer, when they'd seen all the things in the videos and all the documents, they knew exactly who Jones was. There's no hiding who he is. So that moment for them was more entertainment than anything else. It wasn't a critical moment in the trial. It became, though, a critical moment for the public. It became this galvanizing moment, this symbolic thing of it's good to see Jones out of control, not in his element, not on his show doing his thing, but under the crucible of cross-examination and just faltering, just absolutely flailing around on that stand. And so I think from a public perspective, we always knew this trial would have two dimensions. One is compensating these plaintiffs, but even they knew this is way bigger than them. This is about him as a mayhem agent and all of the trauma that he has left in his wake. And so when they saw it come out that way, they were absolutely thrilled with it.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form, available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Juste, we shall spend many a generations building mighty cathedrals in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your oafish jesters, here to offer you a laugh at any opportunity. To our brave knights of the Round Table, Rachel K., Izzy Solidarity, Victoria Bell, Sebastian Demel, Mark Harmon, Benji Arney, Scary Earth Human, Tony, DM Rivera, Resident Scarecrow, Sir Nickus, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Brandon, Words Greenwood, Everything Important, Hegbert Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Doug Cady, Daniel Sutton, Jenna Tal, Dark Puppy, Quiet One 85, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, Multimondi, Trevbot EXE, Brian Ephraim, Anthropophojack, Catherine, Ramon Acosta, Incosin, Ralph Parler, Violent Orchard, Political Puppy, La Media Panza, Todd Buckingham, and Todd La Jeunesse. We salute our valiant heroes off to fight injustice everywhere.